Hey there. Today we're diving deep into the story of San Francisco. It's this incredible city, right? But it's built on ground that has a really long and shaky history. We're going to look at the science, the crazy disasters, and the amazing way the city always bounces back. So what actually happens when the ground beneath an entire city just snaps? And I'm not just asking to be dramatic. This is a real thing people in San Francisco have had to deal with for a long, long time. To figure that out, we've got to look way down, deep beneath the city's streets. Okay, so to really get a grip on the city's story, we first have to understand the science behind it all. It really comes down to what's happening deep, deep under our feet. So here's the deal. The Earth's surface, its crust, isn't one big solid piece. It's actually broken up into these gigantic, slow-moving puzzle pieces called tectonic plates. And guess what? San Francisco is built right on the edge where two of these massive plates meet, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. And that crack, that line where they grind past each other, that's the super famous San Andreas Fault. You're probably wondering, how fast are these giant plates moving? You won't believe it. It's about 2 inches a year. Yeah, that's roughly the same speed your fingernails grow. I know it doesn't sound like much, right? But imagine that slow, steady grinding happening for decades. All that tension just builds and builds and builds. So how does that super slow movement cause a huge, violent earthquake? Well, scientists have a name for it, the elastic rebound theory. Think of it like a rubber band. Step 1, the edges of the two plates get snagged. They get locked together. But step 2, the rest of the plates keep trying to move. So this incredible pressure starts to build up over years and years. Then, step 3, the pressure just becomes too much, and the rocks along the fault, they snap, just like that rubber band breaking. And when they do, bam! Step 4, a massive wave of energy is released. And that energy is what we feel as an earthquake. And that whole elastic rebound thing we just talked about, that is exactly what happened back in 1906, on what is probably the most infamous day in San Francisco's entire history. This is where the science lesson gets very, very real. The date was April 18th, 1906, and the time, 5:12 in the morning. Most of the city was still asleep when all that tension that had been building for decades just let go. And the result? A monster earthquake with an estimated magnitude of 7.9. I mean, this thing was so powerful, the shaking was felt all the way from Oregon down to Los Angeles. Just imagine that. But believe it or not, the shaking was only the beginning. The real disaster was this devastating 1-2 punch. First, the quake itself. It lasted for a terrifying full minute, bringing brick buildings crashing down and splitting streets wide open. But then came the second punch. Broken gas lines all over the city immediately ignited. And because the water mains were also shattered, the firefighters were basically helpless. Fires just burned completely out of control for 3 straight days and nights. When it was all over, it was the fires that had done most of the damage. We're talking more than 28,000 buildings just gone, turned to ash. Whole neighborhoods that were built with wood simply vanished. It's honestly hard to even imagine that level of destruction. But what happened next is just as incredible. The city started to rebuild, and they were determined to create a stronger, safer San Francisco from those very ashes. But the human cost was just immense. Think about this. Over 200,000 people, that's more than half the entire city's population at the time, were suddenly homeless. The U.S. Army had to set up these huge refugee camps in parks, like Golden Gate Park. You had families living in tents and tiny wooden shacks, just waiting in these long, long lines for basic food and water. But out of this total catastrophe came some incredible innovation. Architects started using these new, flexible steel frames and buildings, which are designed to sway with an earthquake instead of just crumbling. The city also built a whole new water system with separate reservoirs, so firefighters would never be left stranded again. And, maybe most importantly, this disaster basically launched the modern science of studying earthquakes, seismology, in the U.S. For the first time, scientists really started to seriously study the San Andreas Fault. Okay, so for decades after that, the city grew, things were rebuilt, and the memory of 1906 started to fade a little. But then, in 1989, the ground shook again. It was this powerful, jolting reminder that the danger had never really gone away. Now, the Loma Prieta earthquake in '89 wasn't as big as the 1906 monster, but it was a whole new kind of wake-up call. This time, the biggest damage wasn't from fires. It was from collapsing modern infrastructure, like a huge chunk of the Bay Bridge. And that sent a really clear message. It's not enough to build new stuff the right way. You also have to go back and strengthen the older buildings and highways to make them safe. And this led to some seriously cool engineering solutions, like something called base isolation. It's a pretty genius idea, actually. You basically put the entire building on these giant flexible pads or bearings, almost like shock absorbers. So when an earthquake hits and the ground starts shaking like crazy, the pads absorb all that energy and the building itself moves way, way less. It's one of the most important technologies keeping modern skyscrapers standing today. All right, so all of this history, the science, the disasters, the hard lessons learned, it all brings us to today. So how do you actually live in a place where you know the ground could start moving at any moment? How do you prepare? The single most important thing you can know is what to do the second the shaking starts. And it's really simple to remember. Drop, cover, and hold on. First, you drop to your hands and knees. Then, you find cover for your head and neck under a sturdy table or desk. And finally, you hold on to that shelter until the shaking stops. That simple action has been proven over and over to save lives. And the other crucial piece of the puzzle is having an emergency kit ready to go. You want to have at least 3 days' worth of water and food that won't spoil. You'll also need essentials like a flashlight with extra batteries, a first aid kit, and a battery-powered radio. Look, in a big disaster, having the plan and a kit is the absolute best way to feel in control and stay safe. You know, from the absolute terror of 1906 to the incredible engineering marvels of today, San Francisco's story is all about learning and adapting. The city has taken the lessons from its past to build a much safer future. But it kind of leaves us with one big question to think about. Knowing everything we know about the science and the risks, can any city ever be truly ready for the next big one?